Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story. Hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at, that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality, not illusion or delusion, that's going to determine what the future will bring. And I have to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They're my views. And for the next hour, they're going to be the views of Randy Engel. And I am deeply indebted to Randy for calling my attention and providing us with certainly some amazing information. Now, basically, it's very seldom we have an opportunity to actually find out what the people on the other side are doing. Certainly, we have the writings of Professor Carroll Quigley, who is associated with the people who rule the world, and basically, I know what he said was true because I went back to Georgetown University. We offer an interview with Professor Quigley. We actually have all of his papers and going into how he actually got into their secret records and found out about their secret meetings as they were planning to take over the world. And certainly, there have been a few other times when we've talked to people who had first-hand understanding of what was going on. Colonel Daniel Marvin, trained as an assassin by the CIA, being told, of course, that they had killed President Kennedy and why they killed President Kennedy. But the story you're going to hear this afternoon is something that Randy Engel got from a doctor in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a Dr. Dunnigan, who back in 1969 had heard a talk by Dr. Richard Day, who was director of research for Planned Parenthood, I guess, medical director for Planned Parenthood, back prior to that in the late 1960s. And if you want to understand anything going on today, you have to read what this is all. We have it in a transcript form. We have it in a 4 CD set. And if you analyze what was said, it is the most amazing thing. How do we understand the contraction of our economy, the massive trade deficits we have? Well, it was all planned. How do we understand the terrorist attacks on America and how we have to submit to all these invasive manhandling there when we get to the airport or be exposed to radiation? Why, the whole terrorist system, the terrorist attack on America was planned back there in the 1960s. It is all planned. Randy Engel, that is one of the most amazing interviews of all the things we have. I think it's probably one of the most important for today. How did you ever happen to meet Dr. Dunnigan and have him tell you his story?
Well, Dr. Dunnigan was a right-to-lifer here in the Pittsburgh area, and so it was inevitable that we meet. And I had known him about 3 or 4 years, and I had often talked about this. To use the expression, the New World Order. And I think in the back of Dr. Dunnigan's mind, perhaps there was a little doubt if, are there really people out there who are intent on directing just about every phase of living? And so one day he asked me over to his pediatrician's office, and we sat down, and he started to tell me about the speech of Dr. Richard Day. Now, Dr. Day was the former medical director of Planned Parenthood, and he had come to Pittsburgh in March of 1969. And he was well known. Dr. Day was well known for his work in the pediatric field, neonatal care. So naturally, when they had this formal meeting and he was the guest speaker, everyone assumed that he was going to talk about neonatal care.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Well, this is Dr. Stan. Our guest this afternoon is Randy Engel, and Randy lives back in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And certainly sometime in the late 1980s or very early 1990s, she had an opportunity to talk to a Dr. Dunnigan. And Dr. Dunnigan was a pediatrician in Pittsburgh. And he began to tell her about a meeting he'd attended in 1969 where the speaker was Dr. Richard Day, the former medical director of Planned Parenthood. Well, of course, when Dr. Dunnigan attended this meeting, suddenly Dr. Day had said there will be no recordings, there will be no notes taken, but
That's
I'm
right.
going to tell you what the future holds. Now, basically, Dr. Dunnigan was pro-life. He was certainly a pediatrician. The story was so incredible. I first heard these tapes many years ago, and I had to track Dr. Dunnigan down and find out if it was really true, because certainly I have a certain responsibility to my listeners to be accurate. I listened to Dr. Dunnigan. I talked to him. I interviewed him. I believe he's telling the truth. But when did you actually record these interviews with Dr. Dunnigan? Do you recall?
Yes, it was the late 1980s, and I asked him if I could do let me backtrack a minute, Stan. He gave me, after this meeting with him, when he explained this 1969 speech that Dr. Day had given him, I received 2 tapes, and I'll never forget that moment, because I took the tapes after hearing him discuss all the information that Dr. Day had rattled off in his 2-hour speech, and I pocketed them, and then on the way home, I put in the tapes. Well, I have to tell you, I had a hard time keeping the car on the road. It was like I had the same reaction you had, and that was, can this be true? And I knew Dr. Dunnigan to be an honorable and a trustworthy individual, but as an investigative reporter, I felt that it was important that I do some tracking of my own. So I did go out and did some research on Dr. Day. Oddly enough, although he was a director of Planned Parenthood, medical director for quite a few years, there was actually very little in the Planned Parenthood library in New York City on Dr. Day, but I was able to get enough information, enough
Hold that thought. We're going to be back here in just a moment. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Randy is simply saying that when she first heard this story, it is so incredible. She just wondered if it could really be true, and like myself, she wanted to be sure that she wasn't certainly being taken advantage of, but certainly she was able to find out that Dr. Richard Day had been the medical director of Planned Parenthood, and of course, but you pick up the story there.
Well, what I noticed is that I was able to glean from the text of some of his articles and some of the speeches that he had given previous to 1969. And what I found out, of course, was that there were that he had used very similar language to the talk that he gave in 1969. Although I think his March 1969 talk on what he called the new new world system. I think that probably was as detailed a discussion as he had ever given. Nevertheless, I was able to confirm that, in fact, he did give this talk, and I was able to confirm the title because Dr. Dunnigan was good enough to provide a program for me of that night's activities, and I was able to do some follow-up. And what has happened over the years is that virtually everything that Dr. Day said would come to fruition has, in fact, become almost a part of our daily lives. at this point, Dr. Stan, it probably would be good to start talking about, some of his predictions.
All right. Well, you pick up the story there because you know it so well, so much better than anybody else I know. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, one of in addition to the specifics of this new upcoming New World System, Dr. Day laid out some common premises that would dominate the system.
But I think it's so important people understand, he was describing in 69 there was going to be this new world system, and we were going to do away with the old world system, as we certainly destroyed the infrastructure of this country, transferred our industrial potential overseas. I mean, this is 1969. But you go ahead and tell the story.
Well, I think his initial remarks were not any surprise to Dr. Dunnigan, who was sitting there, of course, taking notes on napkins, since Dr. Day said no one could record his talk. And his opening theme was that under this new world system, there would be sex without reproduction and reproduction without sex. And what he went on to explain was that he mentioned specifically sex initiation or sex education programs in schools. These would be the vehicle by which the young child and then the young adult and the grown woman or man, their views on sex could be completely altered away from any connection between marriage and having children and raising children. Rather, sex would be simply a vehicle for and almost like a form of entertainment. And the section with reproduction without sex, that had to do with his explanation of in vitro fertilization in the laboratory, and the new techniques that would preclude normal marital conjugal relations, so that there would be no connection, and that would be made possible, of course, through contraception, through abortion, and finally through sterilization. So, as I said, that was a major factor in this coming New World System. And I asked myself, why would anyone want to promote promiscuity? Why would anyone want to destroy innocence? I mean, what's the idea behind that? And what it became clear was that individuals who are trapped in the sexuality circle, who are proficient in vice as opposed to proficiency in virtue, these are people that are easily controllable and will not provide any opposition to the coming New World System. So, here we have really a grooming of our young people in amoral and immoral acts, simply to be to serve their New World masters.
And I thought one of the interesting things, as I remember, and Chris, is a long time ago, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically, of course, they wanted the sex education. So young girls, 13, 12-year-old girls, would get pregnant. And then, of course, what are the parents going to do? I mean, their child is pregnant. Well, they're going to have to support an abortion. After all, you wouldn't want to destroy this little girl's life. And so now the family is giving up their Christian concepts of morality and saying, well, it's expedient, we'll just go ahead and abort the unborn child, and to save our daughter the embarrassment and the problems. And so now, of course, the families are beginning to shift in support of abortion because, of course, well, they had to do something because their daughter is pregnant. And how diabolic it was, how they would manipulate people. You remember that part?
Yes, I do. And what was very interesting about Dr. Day's comments were, and he did this throughout his speech, he would say, he would give, the fact that, millions and millions of children would be unborn children would be aborted, and that but the good thing about it is, as a result of all these abortions, people would become accustomed to killing their own children, and therefore, again, the goal was to reduce population, and you have to see abortion within this context that is repeated throughout the day talk, and that is the necessity of reducing population, meaning people, to what he would call sustainable entities.
And of course, one of the most horrible things was the idea, and he said back in '69, we have treatments for cancer, but we're going to have to keep them locked up there in the basement of the Rockefeller Foundation. People are going to have to die of something. They might as well die of cancer. And ladies and gentlemen, they have had knowledge on how to cure cancer for a long time, but these wicked and evil people want cancer because, of course, it controls the population. And as he said, people are going to have to die of something. They might as well die of cancer. And if you've never seen anybody die of cancer, why, you can't understand how horrible this is. But there really are people out there with connections to the highest level of our government who have this philosophy. We're going to suppress the treatments because they're going to have to die of something. Go ahead.
It's he mentions only one proper name throughout his entire talk, and so he didn't reveal the men, the hidden faces, and so forth, but he did mention the Rockefellers, and he mentioned them at a number of times. And I think it's important for your listeners to realize that this man was an insider. He was a part of the Rockefeller clique, and he knew what was going on. And he knew what was going on. Obviously, being associated with Planned Parenthood, he knew all about abortion and sterilization and so forth. But as he started to talk, it was revealed. For example, he said that that society would be highly sexualized. In other words, clothing would be cut such as to accentuate certain body parts. There would be the introduction of porn. Porn, you wouldn't have to go out to some slimy little hole in the wall to watch porn flicks. You would be able to get them on your VCR, and everything would be shown. Everything imaginable and not imaginable, he mentioned, would come on your screen. And when I heard that, I thought that was really odd, because if your listeners try to remember what it was in '69, the term, VCR, that wasn't even in the public consciousness yet. Yet he knew it was already on the drawing board. He would talk about other items, and Stan, since you mentioned it, I'm going to mention it too, because it was so important. It had to do with people's livelihood, and he made it quite clear, again, in relationship to sustainable Earth, and that we had enough pollution, and it was time for us to ship our heavy industry abroad. In other words, let some of the less developed countries tackle the question of pollution. So he said the United States, this is in 1969, had been designated as a technology and educational world center. and that our heavy industry would be shipped abroad. Of course, I'm from, Pittsburgh, sitting here in Pittsburgh, Steel City. Well, our steel mills are all gone. Shortly after Day made that comment about the steel industry leaving the states, sure enough, here in Pittsburgh, it was announced that the steel mills would be closing, and other items, for example, the car industry, we would be losing.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Randy, go right ahead.
Yeah, we talk about this loss of our economic base, and Dr. Day outlined step by step that we were going to be deindustrialized. He talked about the fact that our Declaration of Independence, in other words, as a country, that we would be independent in every way in terms of manufacturing. He said that was obsolete. We have now to entertain a new declaration of interdependence, so that countries would be assigned these managers operating behind the scenes. We have been designated as a technological, educational country. Now, I ask you, Stan, did you vote for that? I did. I know. I was never. It was never a ballot issue. Do you want to get rid of your heavy industry, and do you want to become this?
No, of course not. But
No.
They knew exactly what they were doing. This was all carefully planned.
Planned, and that's the key. Now they don't plan everything to the to the dot. What they do is they plan large scopes of activities such as industrialization and shipping that abroad. I'm sure they had NAFTA was probably written very early and then given to the congressmen and senators to pass this legislation for our country. But so much of what passes for legislation these days doesn't in fact start and is not beneficial to us. We're talking about being beneficial to a world economy, and if it takes the United States has to sacrifice millions and millions of its jobs, well, that's it, because that's the plan.
And it is a plan, and really, of course, we talked about how they were going to get our automotive industry moved overseas, how we were going to intentionally build inferior cars that really could compete with the Japanese cars, how much they'd be much better. We would use plastic on our door handles and our window handles so they'd break off and fall off, and people would get angry at American cars, and they'd want a Toyota car, they'd want a Japanese car, because those cars were made solid and they would last so much longer. So this whole idea of shifting our automotive production to other countries was really all planned. They knew exactly what they were doing back in 1969. It was just that the average American had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it is, as a kid growing up, I can remember looking at something, in the store, and if it said "Made in Japan," my parents would make some remark, "Oh, that's junk." I mean, that was the whole thing. A car made in Japan, oh, that couldn't be very good. But this New World system has absolute control over the media and over, as I said, over the large industrial patterns of how we grow as a nation, and through the media and
hold that thought. We'll be right back here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Sonny Randy simply talking about this talk that Dr. Day gave, and we have the transcript, Dr. Dunnigan's description of it. And what we're seeing today in the wave of globalization was all readily well planned back in 1969, shifting our automotive industry overseas, shifting our other industries overseas to the point where we would have no production here in the United States. We would simply be a technological community, and production would be done in other nations. This was all planned. They knew exactly what they were doing. But of course, what's going to happen as far as all of our workers? Well, they're just out of work, or we'll get them retrained. How are you going to train somebody who's 50 years old to become a computer technician? And then, of course, we don't produce any computers here in the United States. We don't have any electronic industry. We've shipped it all overseas, along with our textile industry, along with our steel industry. All carefully planned. And of course, increasingly, you're going to see the other instruments that are made out of steel being made overseas as we simply reindustrialize America so we can lower the living standards here down. But you have to read what they were saying back in 1969. Nothing is happening by accident. It was all planned. But go right ahead, Randy.
Well, I think one of I know Dr. Dunnigan was deeply religious, and so when Dr. Day began to talk about what kind of religion we would get with this New World System. Now, he would often make these, throughout his speech, he made these quips. And he said, well, people need religion, so we're going to give them religion. And so Dr. Dunnigan, started this was a point that was of special interest to him. And Dr. Day said that there would be, people need religion, so we're going to give them a new religion. But this would be a religion without dogma and without morals. It would be the kind of religion that would make you feel good inside, but would be totally vacant in terms of what the beliefs were, and any morals that would go along with it. And if you look around and you see what Americans tolerate today, that was unthinkable in the late 1960s. And of course, immediately one would think of the killing of unborn children. Abortion was unthinkable. That the Supreme Court would approve of this killing, but Dr. Day said, 1969, he said that abortion would be legalized and that it would also be tax funded. So this was all on the drawing board, and no surprise. It was just planned that way.
But of course, the other thing is that they were even talking about the terrorism that was going to come. I mean, who back in 1969 was thinking about a world terrorist movement? But this whole thing is instigated. I would just comment incidentally, anybody who wonders who's funding the Al-Qaeda, who's killing the American boys, you go up on the internet and type in Belfast Telegraph, Lord Black, and then funding terrorists. And on the 4th of November of this month, Lord Black got up in the House of Parliament, and you can actually see this on some of the websites up there, and said, I've been spending billions of dollars to terrorists throughout the world. Yes, we funneled billions of pounds to the Irish Republican Army and billions of pounds to the terrorists in North Africa. Of course, he didn't mention that's Al-Qaeda who's killing our boys, and over there, somebody's got to fund Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Did you ever wonder who's funding them over there in Afghanistan, the killing boys? Why, it's all coming from the Bank of London. That's at least part of it. I'm sure we have our own organizations, but here's a peer, a British Lord Black is his name. Anybody wants to see the article, you can't get it, we'll be glad to send you a copy if you contact us, and just ask for the article on Lord Black or funding the terrorists. Here we have a world terrorist movement. We've got to have everybody patted down at the airport. We've got to have, the CT scans to protect us from terrorism. And who's funding it? Well, Lord Black says the Bank of London. He says, don't call the police. I'm just doing what I'm told to do. We're simply we're funding money to the terrorists. I'm not a money launderer. I'm a money washer, was his term. So basically, everything is planned, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing is that appears to be. Everything is illusion and delusion. And back here in 1969, Dr. Day, who is one of the insiders, is talking about this coming terrorist attack on the West. You want to pick up on that thought?
Yes. Now, again, he said some of the most outrageous comments. He said that there would be a growing terrorist movement, and he said that would largely be confined to Europe. But he said that if it was necessary, they could bring terrorism to our own shores.
Oh, shucks, and what do you know? Why? We got terrorism right on our own shores. That's why they've got to just search you all the time. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair. As we raise our voices in a solemn prayer, God bless America.
Well, Randy, you go right ahead.
Well, I wanted to add that Dr. Day said that Americans would be willing to give up their freedoms for additional security. In other words, the people behind the scenes who are doing all this manipulation, they know what makes people tick. If they want to achieve a particular goal, they know how to manipulate public opinion in such a way as to achieve that goal. They can manipulate the mass media, and they can probably convince the American people to do anything they want.
And I think that's exactly true. And we see this, how they're manipulating us now. How they can get us angry, they can get us happy, how they can entertain us. But people don't understand everything is manipulation. Certainly our television programs, many of them are designed just to confuse you or to frighten you or to entertain you so that you won't have any thoughts about what's going on. But instantly I'd love to watch History and the channel and Discovery Channel, because all of their programs, some of them are very interesting, but they always will come back to global warming. Oh, global warming is so real. Everybody knows global warming is real. Watch the History Channel programs on science and nature, and certainly, and watch the programs on Discovery, and they'll always get around to global warming. Why do they want to get around to global warming? Because it's a fraud, but they want to convince you of something that isn't true. But if something is said often enough by enough people, most people will not challenge it. After all, how could everybody be wrong and me be right? They must be right and I must be wrong. So I'm going to believe what they want me to believe. I'm going to believe in global warming. But the television is used to form our tastes, to create our ideas, to form what we believe in. Go right ahead, Randy.
Well, I'm sure when some of our listeners heard that the CIA had funded Gloria Steinem and the women's liberation movement.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and suddenly Randy was just saying how the CIA funded Gloria Steinem and the women's liberation movement, but the CIA has funded so many things. They've funded the communist movement here. They funded so many of the revolutionary movements. The radical left was all funded by one or another government agency. We certainly have books written by Wesley Swearingen, who was a member of the FBI for 23 years, and FBI Secrets tells how they were funding all sorts of these radical movements and But that's a different subject. Basically, our guest today is Randy Engel. We're talking about a 4-tape set we have. It's called The New Order of the Barbarians. The New Order of the Barbarians, the interviews with Dr. Dunnigan, who in 1969 had heard the talk given by Richard Day, the director of Planned Parenthood, or the former director of Planned Parenthood, medical director of Planned Parenthood, telling about the plan of the insiders for the world, how they were going to send our industrial base overseas, which they have, how they were going to send our automotive production overseas by creating and building inferior cars here in the United States so the Japanese cars would be better, how they were already planning at that time on the possibility of bringing the threat of terrorism to the United States, as a means of controlling the American people. And he goes right down the line in 1969, talking about how abortion is going to be legalized, sex education is going to change the moral fabric of our society. You'll be able to watch television in your own living room. For the comfort of your living room, you won't have to go out someplace to watch pornography. The whole changing of the structure of our society, it really is an amazing thing. Randy, before we go on, would you like to tell our listeners how they can get in touch with your ministry?
Yes. If and I hope they certainly are, even if they doubt anything that we've said, go to our website, which is www.uscl.info. That's uscl.info. That is the site of the U.S. Coalition for Life. And if they go over to the research library, they will find the transcript that you mentioned. I don't think the transcript is as effective in driving home the reality of this New World System and its meaning for us as Americans as the videotapes and as the cassette tapes and the CDs are, but I think it will give them a start in trying to get a handle on what this New World System means to them, what it means to their family, what it means to their livelihood, the economy, what it means to their religious beliefs. What it means to their, to morals, to every aspect of living. Because when Dr. Day used the term population control, as I came to understand, what he's essentially talking about is people control, the control of the way that we live. And, of course, the way that we die, because while he was pushing birth control at one end, he mentioned that there would be an increase in euthanasia, that is, the killing of the handicapped and the elderly. And, in fact, he had a whole scenario built around what he called the demise pill. And this would be the pill that you would take at having reached a certain age, and everyone would wish you well, including your family members, and they would give a party for you, a going-away party, and then you would go and, you would essentially be humanely killed. And when he was talking, as I recall, there's a movie called Soylent Green. And in that movie, there was pretty much the same thing, that if you reached a certain age, that you would be sent to a happy hunting ground. They would euthanize you on the table as you were watching beautiful pictures and listening to, Beethoven's symphonies.
Well, today we call it end-of-life care. We call it hospice, but they send people to hospice who don't have cancer, or there are people who put on end-of-life care who do not have cancer, but they made the decision, the doctors have made the decision, or perhaps the families have made the decision that it's time for them to go, and they simply start them on an IV morphine drip, and that's the end of them. I'm not talking about something imaginary. I'm talking about things going on across America today, and nobody is talking about it. They call it Hospice, they call it end-of-life care, but they're not necessarily have terminal cancer. They just put them on end-of-life care because, well, basically Medicare is not going to pay for these patients going back in the hospital. And if the doctor is spending too much money, the hospital gets paid a certain amount of money, whether they're 1 day or 100 days. And after a while the hospital puts pressure on the doctor, and the doctor's got to get rid of that patient. And if they can't go home, why they go on end-of-life care. This is not imaginary, ladies and gentlemen. It's happening in America today. And where is the outcry from our doctors? Well, they're trapped in a system, and the hospitals are putting pressure on them, and they've got to get rid of these patients because they're going to bankrupt the medical system. And if you care about the medical system, why, we've got to just prevent excessive overutilization, like people in the hospitals for a long period of time trying to save their lives. So these things, so many of the things that Dr. Day talked about are coming to pass today. Our telephone number, if you have a question for Randy, 1-888-24-LIBERTY, 1-888-24-LIBERTY, or 464-8295. 1-888-24-LIBERTY, 464-8295. Could it really be that everything going on today is planned? Well, this is why this is such an important 4-tape set, and this is why really the transcript is so vitally important. You can get it at Randy's website, or you can get the transcript from my ministry. If you have access to the computer, go there. Once again, what's the website, Randy?
It's www.uscl.info, INFO, and that's the website for the U.S. Coalition for Life.
The U.S. Coalition for Life. Well, if you're out there in the listening audience and you have a question, maybe you don't believe this is true, well, I will tell you that I certainly talked to Dr. Dunnigan before he passed away, and he wasn't that old a man when he passed away, was he?
No, he was in his late 70s, so it was a great loss. So I'm glad he made the tapes. It's kind of his the legacy that he has left behind. And there is no place on the web in which you can, there's a lot of talk about the New World Order, but this is an actual concrete statement made by an insider, very much at the level of that Quigley was able to talk about so well after his investigation of the movers and the shakers of the Eastern establishment. That's what one of the terms he used when he was describing the upcoming New World System.
And, of course, this whole idea of the world order has been around for a long time. And, of course, they're using the financial and the military power of the United States to bring about the world government. Why do you think we have troops stationed in well over 130 nations throughout the world? We are occupying those countries, and those countries will do what they're told to because we have our troops stationed there. And the same thing is why we have 720 military bases throughout the world. Who are we protecting ourselves against? We're not protecting ourselves against anybody. Basically, what we're doing is actually, of course, this is the basis by which we control other nations. When you have your military forces there, why, they will do what you want to. And certainly we rig elections. If you haven't read the book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, John Perkins' book, Confessions of Economic Hitman, he was part of this. He talked about how they simply sent in their assassins to kill world leaders who didn't want to go along with what was going on. It must be true because the State Department put up pages there and just attacking John Perkins, saying what an irresponsible person he was. And all it did was get more copies of his book sold. And because he wrote another book, America's Secret Empire. We do have an empire, ladies and gentlemen. It's all about the New World Order. And there's not one person in 1,000 in America who really understands what's going on. Our telephone number, 1-888-24-LIBERTY, 464-8295. Our guest is Randy Engel, who was kind enough to allow us to reproduce the tapes that she had got from Dr. Dunnigan. And then, of course, we have my own interview with Dr. Dunnigan as he tells this incredible story of what he had actually heard back in 1969 as the whole future of the world was laid out. And he was listening, and of course, Dr. Day kept saying, people people don't ask enough questions. I mean, they don't. I mean, it should be so obvious what's going on, but nobody questions. And it was almost as if he lamented the fact that this was coming to pass, and nobody seemed to care in 1969.
Well, let's go on to another area which I think will be of interest to the listener, and that is his whole scenario on banking. He made it very clear that we would have, at the time that he was talking, credit cards were just coming into being. But he said, of course, we wouldn't, less and less would we be dealing with cash. We might carry some change for bubble gum, but actually he said everything from groceries to clothing and so forth would be put on. And he mentioned two things. He mentioned credit cards. Well, that wasn't too surprising because they were just coming into vogue. But he also mentioned debit cards. Now, debit cards, if you recall, came in much later. But he knew in 1969 that, I mean, he called it by the very correct name. He didn't say something general. He said debit cards. And so if we look at the whole banking system, that was all on the drawing board. And if I don't care if I repeat myself, and it's planned that way.
And somebody is back there planning all of these things. Let's go to Dave, who's calling us from Wisconsin. Hi, Dave. You ever have a question for our guest?
Yeah, I was wondering, is Dr. Day still around, or did he die?
No, he died many years ago. Do you remember when he died?
Let me see. No, that would have been, I think it was probably in the early 1980s. If you would care to contact either Dr. Stan or myself, we'd be happy to give you the details of his death. And I do recall, though, that he was buried in one of the Rockefeller cemeteries.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
It sure is. And in fact, I think you can certainly look it up on the internet. I looked it up, and he may be listed in Wikipedia, as I remember. I could be wrong on that, but it does mention when his death is on the internet. You can find that. And that's Richard Day. Anything else?
Well, I was just wondering also, is there anybody, so to speak, that's maybe taken over as a spokesman for, like he was, or are they all kind of keeping it more quiet?
He never should have told what he did. It's sort of like Lord Black getting up in the Parliament just earlier this month and saying, "Yeah, I'm funding the terrorists throughout the world. I'm funding the terrorists." You're not supposed to say that sort of thing. I wouldn't want to be the fellow who has the life insurance on Lord Black.
That's true.
Okay, anything else,
Okay.
Dave?
No, thank you very much.
God bless,
You're
and
welcome.
certainly, but they've managed to keep this information fairly secret. I mean, certainly Randy's got these tapes out all across America. We've tried to get them out. But really, because the thing that shocks me mainly is that most people, even though they hear the story, don't want to get the tapes. They don't want to get the transcripts. They're just too busy living the good life. Well, the good life's coming to an end, ladies and gentlemen, because, of course, if you read what Richard Haass, what Mortimer Zuckerman, both trilateralists, say in this last month, why, of course, we're moving into a period of austerity, we're moving into a period of lower living standards, and they're going to simply destroy the lives of most of the people, at least in this country, as we move from a middle class to a lower class society. Will be two classes, the elite and then the common people. Go right ahead.
Yes, it will be the drones.
And they know exactly what they're doing. And the information is there. I mean, there have been people on the other side, like Professor Quigley, who came out and really laid it all out in his books. In the two books, they were suppressed for many periods of time. Certainly, Dr. Dunnigan has put this out. We can give a half a dozen people who've come from the other side to tell you exactly what's going on. But, of course, the average person is totally unaware of it, or if he is, he said it couldn't be true, because that you're suggesting is a conspiracy, and there's no conspiracies, and yet The word conspiracy simply means a couple of people getting together and plotting in secret, and there have been conspiracies down through the ages. If you go to the Holy Scriptures and get out your concordance and look up the word conspiracy, they use it over and over again. I figure if the word's good enough for God, it's good enough for us. Go right ahead, Randy.
Well, you mentioned, the tapes and the text. It would be very good. I know that there are many of your listeners who belong to Bible-based groups. They belong to book clubs. They talk among themselves, and I think that even if they can't get the discs or the CDs or get those later, at least look at the transcript. Look at the transcript and circulate parts of it among your friends, and start talking about the issues that affect your life and those of your children. If you have any compassion at all for the future, which is our children, you need to get and to be informed. You need to know how our government works. Our government no longer works by the ballot box. Our government is ruled from afar. They give us the legislation that is necessary. They gave us NAFTA. They gave us all these other deindustrialization pieces of legislation. Those didn't originate with our Congress. They came from outside, and they are actually imposed. And
go right ahead.
Well, I think Dr. Day made it clear, and he said that people don't understand how government works today. In other words, people don't have any appreciation of the way politics can be manipulated, the way that public opinion can be manipulated. And the answer, of course, is if you don't like being manipulated, then you need to cut off the source of the manipulation. And that is, of course, the one of the crux of the problem is that do people want to cut themselves off from this poison?
Hold that thought. We'll be back in a moment. Go ahead and go right ahead and finish your thought, and then we have Gloria calling from Washington.
Well, I just remember that the POWs during the Korean War, one of the strategies they used, and were able to, some of these POWs were able to survive, is they broke their eardrums. In other words, they became immune from the verbal harassment of their interrogators. And it's the same with us. We've got to cut ourselves off from being manipulated in every way and turn to information sources that are reliable and truly which tell the truth.
Amen to that. Well, let's go to Gloria, who's calling from Washington. Hi, Gloria. How are you doing?
Well, hello. I just am really enjoying your speaker tonight, and I just wanted to share quickly that I've seen some terrible things with hospice. I'm not saying that the nurses are not compassionate, but their plan is to come into your home or into the nursing home and to give large doses of morphine. I've seen that several times with different people I know, and I think, saved my dad's life from an overdose, and the PDR, actually, physician's desk reference, said that he should not be taking any morphine with his COPD, and so I actually called the physician who admitted that's what hospice does. They give morphine.
That's right, and that's how they kill the people.
And I would ditto that, Gloria.
I made a lot of family members angry, but I think I saved my dad's life for several more months because I intervened, and that's what we have to do. We have to stand up for truth, and a lot of even Christians are sucked into thinking hospice is so wonderful, and it's a killing machine in some cases. Another thing I've seen, they'll give people some kind of drugs that make them really excited and out of control in a nursing home setting, and then it's just terrible. And then all of a sudden they they give them the morphine that really calms them down, and then they die. And I've seen that happen several times, too. So I just really appreciate the fact that she brought that up. And are you familiar with Ron Panzer, Hospice Patients Alliance?
No, I'm not.
Oh, he's a wonderful Catholic that started this. He was a hospice nurse, and he has done a lot to expose.
Why don't you call me off the air and give me the details? Maybe we get him on. I'd love to get him on, okay?
Okay, thank you.
God bless. Thanks so much, Gloria. Well, I guess...
Stan, I would mention at this point, if you've got a living will, it's a death warrant. Get rid of your living will and get a pro-life will that will give you the life support and the treatment that you need when you are in critical care.
I think that's an excellent point. Hang on there. We'll be back in just a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly Randy Engel was just commenting. If you have a living will, get rid of it. Get a pro-life will. You can get that through her organization. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen, they know exactly what they're doing, but they don't want you to know exactly what they're doing. That's what the living will is all about. Only it's not a living will. It's really a deadly will. Well, Randy, we're out of time. God bless, and thank you so very much for being with us. I think it's such an important subject. I hope everyone will go to your website and pull down the transcript of the New Order of the Barbarians. It's the most amazing information you'll ever read. God bless. Thanks so much.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, fine. If you're out there in the listening audience, we certainly hope that maybe you'll want to get this. Now, you can get it off of Randy's website. You can get it from us, but we got it all nicely bound in a little booklet, and so we have to charge for it. Let me suggest you get the tapes and you get the transcript, and you read it, and you read it, and you reread it, and then you study it, and then you have our permission to go ahead and copy of it. And get the information out across America. We want the people to know that everything is going according to plan, and there is a master plan. Certainly, if you've never heard of the interview we have is not an interview I did with Professor Quigley, but an interview that we have with Professor Quigley. As he talks about these people who rule the world, how they suppressed his book, about the emblem on the back of the dollar bill, the pyramid cap by the all-seeing eye. And as he said, these crazy right-wingers, they want to tell me that that's the symbol of the Illuminati. He says it's been around for 6,000 years. Well, he's absolutely right. It's been around for at least well over 4,000 years. It's the emblem of the ancient mystery religions that sprung up after Nimrod, of course, failed in his effort to build the Tower of Babel. And, of course, it was this idea of fulfilling Nimrod's dream of a one-world government under a one-world leader. And that's, of course, what Plato wrote about. They were all involved. If you haven't read my book, Brotherhood of Darkness, you need to get it. You need to read it. And then, of course, the information is all there. Certainly, you can get our information on the occult hierarchy. There are 3 pamphlets, about 150 pages, introducing you to this. You can get William Still's excellent book, The New World Order, The Ancient Plan of Secret Societies, because that's what this world government is all about. And then certainly you ought to get the 4-tape set, The New Order of the Barbarians, and of course you can get the transcript, or you can get them both together. But you need to understand it's very, very rare that somebody on the other side ever comes forward and tells us exactly what the plan is, but you'll read the plan right here. And I believe this is accurate. I interviewed Dr. Dunnigan before he passed away, and his information, I believe, is valid. Our telephone number, of course, is 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. Our webpage is radioliberty.com. That's radioliberty.com. I would mention that we are primarily listener-supported, and if you are out there listening to our programs and you agree suddenly that there is a problem, and you'd like to join the Radio Liberty family of supporters and help us support the 60 outlets we have every week, why, give us a call, because your financial contribution will help us. We're behind for the year, and if I would like to end the year certainly out of the red, so if you can give us a hand, 1-800-544, and if 8927 1-800-544-8927. And if you're not in a position to help, then please pray for Radio Liberty, for our provision and for our protection. We do have, of course, this great new DVD by our friend Lynn Marzulli on the UFOs and about the alien implants, the interviews with Dr. Roger Lair, who's actually removed 16 of them. It's called The Watchers, and fascinating information on the cattle mutilations. You'll see them. You'll see the UFOs. You'll see the alien implants. That's The Watchers. You'll want to get the DVD. The Secret of Oz. That's The Secret of Oz. Goes in the background of the Wizard of Oz, and of course the whole story was a metaphor, was an allegory of the banking system. You certainly want to get my talk on the financial Armageddon, how they brought on this whole financial collapse. It comes with an excellent syllabus. Please pray for America, pray for revival, but pray for Radio Liberty, for our provision and for our protection. And so until tomorrow at the same time, may the Lord be with you.